This is really exciting. At Facebook, we have a lot of core company cultures or values that we like to use. One of them is to be open. This is my first time up on stage like this, so I'm a little bit nervous. I'll give that to you. I'm also actually a little bit more nervous about what happens tomorrow. 7 a.m. tomorrow, I'm moving, so I have to run out of here just as soon as this is done and go pack the boxes. So it's going to be a little bit of an adventure, but that's just how it works. I get to talk today about off-the-shelf analytics, and that's a little bit different for everyone, and I think it's going to be something that, the story that I get to tell today is very much our story, and everyone else would have a different story to tell. At the same time, I think that's something to keep in mind, and I was actually very pleasantly surprised about the discussion today, where analytics is a piece of everything that you do, and to include analytics at the beginning, middle, and end of the process is key. The fact that that message actually landed this morning, I guess I didn't necessarily need to repeat it, but at the same time, hearing it from someone else was great validation. A little bit about me. Even though I've had lots of different titles over the years, basically I've always been an analyst. Analyst at heart, analyst in what I do, how I approach things. It's just part of my nature. I've worked in 3 different industries, everything from consumer finance, e-commerce, and now advertising. I've had lots of different departments. I've worked in product, marketing, finance, IT, supply chain, operations, you name it, I've basically been there. But for the last several years, I've been really focusing on marketing analytics, and that's a totally different space than many others, and at the same time, it happens exactly the same way. Data in, data out, insights, et cetera. And what that's kind of brought me to is that analytics is really an overused and often misunderstood term. You can't think of it the same way that you think of other things, and you also can't think of it as an afterthought. Many people see it as a separate team, or they embed one analyst with each team that don't talk to the other analysts, and so there's no common ground. For today, I think we need to set some common ground on exactly what I mean by analytics in order for us to have a good conversation together. Really, to me, there's a core, simple definition of analytics. It's all activities necessary to create actionable insights. That's it. Anything else is superfluous to this definition and also something that would kind of take away from the focus. At the same time, actionable insights is key. Many times as an analyst, I get asked questions and someone wants a number that they can put on their review cycle or show to their boss to say how great they are. To me, that's not analytics, that's just you proving that you thought you did something interesting. Analytics without action isn't actually valuable. It's like data in a warehouse and it just kind of sits there and it's not garnering value for the organization. At the same time, there's probably a broader and more encompassing piece of this that's often overlooked. All activities necessary to create actionable insights could be expanded to include collection and storage of data, and then the evaluation and presentation of that data to inform that insight. Collection and storage is something that I think most analysts are used to taking for granted. They walk into work, they sit at their computer, they query a database, and boom, they have their answer. On my team, I think of it as that's where you start for your day-to-day job. If you don't start there, you don't actually know what you're working with and how it came to be. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of our journey. Obviously, Facebook's business marketing team is globally scaled, incredibly sophisticated, and incredibly diverse in terms of their audiences that they work with, the channels that they use, and exactly how they go about their day-to-day business. Coming in and helping this team has been eye-opening to me, coming from a direct response world where everything was online. In our case, events, much like this one, or tentpoles like Cannes or CES play a significant role in our marketing mix. It also plays a significant role in our budgets. And to measure all of our budget, you need to measure everything. You can't just measure the easy things that are digital. So what we needed to do was come up with a consistent and consolidated data mart, 1, and 2, because we operate in a B2B world with many large and small companies that we interact with, we needed to leverage our internal data to really complete this picture. At the end of the day, what this enables is everything that you've heard about. whether it's machine learning or attribution analysis or personalization. All of these things can't come to fruition unless you have both of these pieces. As an engineer, I often like to break down problems into smaller and smaller components to make sense of them. If you don't break something down, it just seems too monolithic to really understand. Here I've broken the analytics problem down into 6 stages. And what I would think of it as, everything's going to be driven by that initial data capture that you have to start with up front. Nothing is going to be possible unless you start there. And it also determines exactly how robust and reliable that information is going to be. The second step is to really dig down and do fine-grained processing. And this is something that Tealium does exceptionally well, and is a step that can't be overlooked for its significance in adding value in the overall equation. Third, in our case, we're moving that data using data access into our local data warehouse. And that's where really things kind of start to differentiate for us in terms of being able to add new data to the equation. We bring a lot of that data in the 4th step with additional data enrichment. Moving to the 5th step, we finally get to do that evaluation that most people would think of as analytics, and then present it, whether it's through a dashboard, ad hoc analysis, a presentation, or whatever you want. When we thought about this problem, there were several core considerations that we wanted to keep in mind when we were considering whether or not to go with an external partner. First, if we went with an external partner, they needed to solve a piece of the analytics equation that was going to be difficult for us to solve ourselves. To me, this is a question of whether we should build or buy the wheel. And I hate buying or building another wheel when a perfectly good one exists. You should instead focus on building differentiation. Don't build what someone else already has, but instead build something for yourself. The second point really goes to organic fit. We needed something that would plug into our system, plug into our marketing, and enable us to do things the way we did them, rather than us needing to change our marketing to fit that tool. Third, obviously, because we're a global, complex organization, it needed to fit our business model. Privacy, security, legal, product security, et cetera, come into play here. Obviously, since I'm standing here, we chose Tealium, given, ta-da. It really solves for our core needs, and it fits all of those considerations. But at the same time, I think that there's a couple things that are unique about how Tealium solves them that really set the stage well. Tealium has a great differentiated set of capabilities when it comes to ingesting data. It also basically starts out as a blank slate. You have to build the data model for yourselves, which enables you to build exactly the data model that you need for your business. Other products sometimes walk in and say, here's the data model for e-commerce. And if you're not e-commerce, well, you're just sort of SOL. Third, it's very easy to access data. Other products may offer that solution. It's an add-on, or it's some other kind of like bolt-on that they bought through a vendor or something like that. Tealium is just part of the product. You get access, and boom, you have your raw data, and it's all of your raw data without any ifs, ands, or buts involved. And lastly, something that I especially like is that when we use Tealium, we're using every single part of the product. We didn't pay for a whole lot of product that we don't actually need to use every day. So having said that, how does Tealium fit into this kind of 6 stages or 6 components of the analytics process for us? There's really 3 that basically become very obvious as Tealium's core competencies. And here, you have the 3 things that Tealium has talked about day in and day out, all day today. The other 3 are actually things that existing Facebook infrastructure does incredibly well. Bringing in additional data, letting us work with that on a day-to-day basis is something that's easy to do at Facebook. Leveraging and then developing insights off of that data is incredibly easy, again, simply because we have great internal tools to do it. And the presentation of that data, we have awesome dashboarding tools and things beyond Tableau. I'm going to talk about a couple of these today. The first that I'm going to dive into is how we've tackled initial data capture. As I've mentioned, this really leads the equation for everything else. You won't be surprised to hear that we operate across a lot of different technology partners. We have our own homegrown CMS. We also leverage the WordPress CMS for a dozen or so different domains. We have several specialty platforms to host events like this, or when we integrate with small client meetings, or when we integrate with CRM and other things. There's offline interactions. And finally, we have our own internal data warehouse that has lots of data about the people that we interact with. Like Tealium would tell you to do, we obviously created a universal data layer across all this. It creates an incredible amount of consistency across platforms so that regardless of what kind of interaction the person is having with you at that particular moment, any of these platforms treat it as exactly the same interaction. What ends up happening is you have apples-to-apples view of whether I walk into an in-person event or I happen to be browsing a website. That can be seen the same way, and so it can be treated the same way when it comes to present that data on a dashboard. Next, we used each of Tealium's integration methods, including the server-to-server API, JavaScript, and the UTAG.js, including data layer enrichment that we talked about, that Mike mentioned earlier. Offline interactions, we're using the vData API, and finally, omnichannel. So basically, every single tool that Tealium can throw at data collection, we're leveraging. What this ends up doing for us, and how I think of it from an analytics standpoint, is it allows our analytics team to move from being a reactive organization that needs to catch up to marketing to being much more proactive. We can sit in the meeting with the marketing team, ask their questions about what they'd like to do, and immediately start to evolve our implementation using any of the tools available to us and our data model to fit their needs without needing to go back to the drawing board and start fresh. Next up, I'm going to think through what would have happened had we stopped with the green. These three green buckets are also what would happen basically if you were to implement another analytics provider. You would get through the fact that they've integrated with your marketing efforts, but then sort of stop. And what ends up happening is they look like an island of data. They can tell you a lot about how many people visited your website, whether they converted or didn't convert, exactly how they moved through that process. But then conversion would often be something in marketing speak. It's a lead, or they registered for an event. That actually isn't even miles close to revenue. And so real business value isn't garnered until you can connect the dot all the way through the process to the revenue that comes after that marketing has taken place, and in our case, often after sales have been involved in the process as well. So we move the data into our internal data warehouse on Hive, and from there we can leverage any additional data that we need. In our case, tying the visitors back to the advertisers that they represent enables us to see exactly those people's interactions and those companies' revenue associated with marketing interactions. So here are a couple of examples of where we're integrating. Obviously, CRM is huge. Next up, the Facebook ads tools themselves are entire products that have incredibly complex interactions as you create an ad, publish that ad, manage its budget, and so forth. Third, we can bring additional marketing data to the mix where it's not about the visitor anymore, but it's about the marketing as a plan or as a project, its budget, and other dimensions that don't necessarily pertain to a single individual. And last, we can, as I mentioned, connect into revenue data, which gives us an entirely different view of marketing's value in the overall business mix, as opposed to marketing's value for creating leads. This is where I think that there's enormous potential for disruption and an entirely different kind of scale to marketing analytics than you would traditionally think about as simply stopping at the visit. It's also an opportunity for differentiation in the sense that this is something that most analytics providers I don't think do well in the sense of taking individuals and then combine it with different grains of information like businesses or organizations. Having said all that, this is our journey, and I don't think that's something that everyone should simply take this and generalize to believe that they would even consider embarking on. And what I would suggest is that instead of taking this and trying to adopt it wholesale, you should really think through the process of how you would need to solve for your own individual organization and its considerations. And again, going back to this concept of what defines analytics, use actionable insights and value as your North Star. This is intentionally limited in scope. Don't try to solve analytics as, I need a full stack marketing platform that has analytics built in and happens to do all of the other marketing. If all you're after is analytics, focus on exactly that. There's a few criteria that I would use to think through whether or not this makes sense for you. First, are your needs truly outside the box? If your business happens to fit inside the box, why not just go and buy that wheel? The second, like a couple of pieces to this would be, is your business model somehow different than those off-the-shelf solutions would support? Are your internal policies or red tape so stringent that you can't adopt them? Or would you end up with so many different boxes, like so many different wheels for different point solutions that becomes something that you really can't make good heads or tails sense of? Next, you definitely need to have a vision. If you don't have a vision, and this is something that I mean is 3 or 5 years out on time horizon, then you're going to start working and trying to accomplish things in too short of a time frame. What I've talked about today has taken us months to accomplish. At the same time, don't underestimate what it takes to do this. Going from 0 to 1 in this equation takes a considerable amount of time, and a vision is not specifications. It's a starting point to guide where you're headed, but it is not a roadmap of every step that you need to take along the way. My boss had, every time that something would come up, I would always say, oh, don't worry, I have plan B. And then when plan B didn't work out, I had plan C. And there were always more and more of those situations where we needed to back up to our backup plan. So plan for those in advance so that you don't get a nasty surprise along the way. Partnership is key to many things that you do, but I think here partnership is so much more paramount to success simply because there's going to be many cooks in the kitchen, and trying to hand off a project like this from one group who has a vision to write down like a business requirements document or something like that and hand it off to another team to execute is simply never going to be successful. Everyone who needs to be involved throughout the process constantly without coming and going from the process. Additionally, this isn't sequential. It's very iterative where what you will need to do every day is going to change. In our case, infrastructure wasn't too much of a concern, but I can't stress the fact that it's different for us than it would be for someone else. My capability to pick servers off a rack and get to use them in a dedicated environment just for this purpose is something that's probably relatively unique to Facebook. I can just click a button and have them. On the other hand, if you don't think that hardware and software are going to be part of your core competency, you don't want to own that, this probably isn't something that's going to work in your organization. You should also keep in mind that the hardware and software that you can bring to bear is going to strictly limit your capabilities. If you don't have great hardware, don't have great software to back all of this up, ultimately you're going to have a pile of data that's hard to use. People are going to also influence everything that you can accomplish, and at the end of the day, it's only people who build solutions. You're going to need people who are deeply familiar with your business and with how analytics works and the technical implications of building something like this, and they can't be on some other team. They need to be sitting next to your marketers, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, day in and day out, in order to understand how marketing and analytics work hand in hand, and how this data is the same data that you want to go to market with as they want to build a great dashboard from. And last but not least, do you really want to make the sausage? This is very much a process where you're emulating and creating the tool belt that someone else may have built that works perfectly well for you. Unless you want to really roll up your sleeves and do it all the time, I would suggest staying clear of this simply because it's going to be a process that requires ongoing commitment, a long-term vision, and lots of resources to be really dedicated to go against. So what's next for us? Well, actually, people really spoiled this today because they said basically everything that's on my list. For us, this was really the tip of the iceberg. And I've focused what I talked about today mostly on how Tealium integrates with our process. Obviously, like everyone else is mentioning, scaled marketing and marketing automation, robust customer journeys, custom attribution and ROI modeling, personalization, machine learning, sweeping all this data back and being able to give our sales teams account level information about how any number of people are interacting across any number of our marketing touch points. All of those things are on our roadmaps just like they're on yours. And with that, I'll say thank you.